you please raise your hand so that I know you? So you are Anka and the other. Okay, thank you.
I will just start. Okay.
Wait,
Hi.
excuse me. Can we wait one more minute?
Oh, yes, of course.
Yeah, so before the session start, we would like to make a few quick announcements about the excursion and also the banquet tonight. So for the excursion, we will meet, for those who join the excursion, we will meet at 1:30, just outside the ballroom, so in front of the registration desk. And the bus will come to pick you up, and the bus will pick people up for every like 27 people. So if you come early, you will be able to leave early as well, and then have more time for the excursion. So please try to be here on time. And for the banquet tonight, the banquet will be here, just in this ballroom. We'll open the space, and so the location is here. Start at 7:25. And if you are a vegetarian, please go to the front desk after 5 p.m. before the banquet, and we will give you a vegetarian marker, and you will get a good vegetarian set for the banquet. And finally, we are looking for some people. So if you try to look at the whiteboard outside to see if there's your name, and if there is, then please talk to our staff in the registration desk. And all the, about the banquet and the excursion, the information is also on the whiteboard, so you can also take a look. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Kai-Min, for the quick announcement. Okay, so this session, we will start with the first talk, GUC Secure Commitment via Random Oracles, New Impossibility and Feasibility. So Zhelei Zhou will be giving the talk, please.
Okay, thank you. Hi everyone, this is Zhelei Zhou, a PhD student from Zhejiang University. The topic I want to share today is GUC secure commitments via random oracles, new impossibility and feasibility. It is a joint work with Bingsheng Zhang and Kui Ren from Zhejiang University and Hongsheng Zhou from Virginia Commonwealth University. In this work, we will focus on GUC secure commitments in the global random oracle models. We explore the lower bound on the round complexity of the GUC secure commitments in the global random oracle models. And furthermore, we aim to give round optimal constructions on the minimal assumptions. Before introducing our work, we will explain the motivations of our work. Namely, someone may wonder why we study the global random oracle model and why we study in the GUC framework. If global random oracle is a really interesting setup to study, then what's the difference between the local random oracle and the global random oracle? After explaining the motivations, we'll introduce our research questions and our results. Finally, we will leave two interesting open questions for the future work. Okay, let us start now. Random oracles are important in cryptography. They enable highly efficient protocols. For example, there are some Fed-Shamil heuristic-based zero-knowledge proof, and there are also some RO-based OT protocol. Random oracle is an idealized setup. In real-life applications, people always use hash functions to instantiate the random oracles. The hash functions, such as SHA-256, are predefined and can be obtained by people from anywhere. That means there might be a group of people using it to execute a zero-knowledge proof. At the same time, there might be another group of people using the same hash function to execute the OT protocol. That means in real-life applications, the random oracle can be seen as a global setup, which is available for different protocol instances. However, the famous UC framework only treats random oracle as a local setup. The UC framework proposed by Ran Kennedy is very important in the area of cryptographic protocols, since it can be used to analyze the security of protocols under concurrent executions, and it enables modular design of the protocols. However, in the UC framework, the environment cannot have the direct access to the RAN oracle. In other words, this RAN oracle is only local to the protocol, this protocol instance, and is not available for the parties from other protocol instance. That's why we see that UC framework only treats RAN oracle as a local setup. Therefore, there might be some inconsistency between the theory and the practice. Let us suppose there is a guy named Alice who wants to compose a zero-knowledge proof and an OT protocol, and both of the protocol use RAN oracle as the setup. In practice, Alice may wish to instantiate the RAN oracles in both protocols with the same hash function, such as SHA-256. In this case, there might be some shared states between these two protocols since they use the same hash functions. However, in theory, if Alice chooses to design the underlying zero-knowledge proof and the OT protocol in the UC framework, then there might be some inconsistency because the UC framework only treats RAN oracle as a local setup, so there are no shared states between these two protocols. Then how to remove this inconsistency? To address this issue, Kennedy, Dodis, Pass, and Wolfish proposes the generalized UC short for GUC. In GUC framework, the environment can directly access the RAN oracle. So the simulator can no longer simulate the RAN oracle in the ideal world execution anymore, and the RAN oracle becomes global and is available for different protocol instance, and we choose to study in the GUC framework. A natural question to ask is, what's the difference between the local RAN oracle and the global RAN oracle? Let us first focus on the local RAN oracle. Since the simulator can simulate the local RAN oracle, it provides the simulator with two advantages. That is observability and programmability. Observability means that the simulator can see the queries sent by anyone, and programmability means that the simulator can determine the answer of the queries sent by anyone. However, this no longer holds in the GUC setting, since the GUC simulator is external to the global RAN oracle. Therefore, the simulator can obtain neither the observability nor the programmability by simulating the global RAN oracle. Then how should we model the global RAN oracle? Here we list 4 famous global RAN oracles in the literature. The first global RAN oracle is Global Strict RAN Oracle, short for GSRO. In terms of GSRO, the simulator has no extra power at all. The simulator can only query the GSRO and obtain a random value as the output, just like other parties. Obviously, this setup is so weak, and it is proven in CDPW07 that the GUC secure commitment is impossible to achieve in the GSRO model. The intuition behind this impossibility is that the simulator has no advantages over the real-world adversary in the GSRO model. Therefore, non-trivial two-party functionalities cannot be realized. Later, a strengthened version of GSRO is proposed, namely Global Restricted Observable RO, short for GRORO. In GRORO model, the simulator is granted the restricted observability, namely the simulator can see the adversary's queries. Now the simulator has advantage over the adversary, and GUC secure commitment is possible. In fact, in CGS 14, the authors gave 5-round constructions on the D-log assumptions in the GRO model. After that, another strengthened version of GSRO is proposed, namely the Global Restricted Programmable RO, short for GRPRO. In GRPRO, the simulator is granted the restricted programmability. That is, the simulator can program the unqueried points without being detected. And 3-round constructions was given, but on the CDH assumption. At the same time, the Global Restricted Programmable and Observable RO, short for GRPORO, is proposed. It is the most powerful global RAN oracle in the literature, and it is so powerful that a 2-round GUC secure commitment with unconditional security is possible. With above background knowledge, we can finally introduce our work. Our work focuses on the commitment in the GRL model. We choose to study commitment because it is a fundamental crypto primitive. Having commitment in hand, we can build anything else. And we choose to study the GRL model because other global random oracles is either too weak or too strong. Furthermore, the GRPRO and GRPORO do not capture deniability, since it is remarked in PAS 07 and CGS 14 that deniability is impossible to achieve in the programmable RL model. And because deniability is very hard to formalize and it is out of scope, so we automate it here. To sum up, we believe that GRL model is a reasonable global setup to study. And there are many follow-ups since the original work of the GUC secure commitment in the GRL model. Among them, ours achieves the minimal round complexity and requires the weakest computational assumptions. It is well known that in the local RL model, UC secure commitment can be constructed in only 2 rounds. However, as you can see in this slide, the minimum round complexity of the previous work in the GRL model is 3. Therefore, it is natural for us to ask what is the lower bound on the round complexity of the GUC secure commitment in the GRL model. And furthermore, if there exists such a lower bound, we are also wondering if we can give round optimal constructions on the only minimal assumptions. Note that in this work, we do not consider the simultaneous rounds. To answer the first question, we prove that the lower bound on round complexity for GUC secure commitment in the GRL model is 2. To answer the second questions, we give 3 round constructions on the minimal assumptions in the GRL model, and we suggest that it is round optimal. Now I will give brief descriptions about the security proof of the lower bound. We prove it by contradiction. This proof approach was first introduced by Kennedy and Fitzgerald and was later taken in CDPW07 and DSW08 in the GUC setting. The proof approach can be summarized in 2 steps. First, we just assume such a protocol exists. Then we will review a contradiction. So let us just assume there exists a 2-round GUC secure commitment in the GRL model. And let us consider the case where the receiver is statically corrupted. In this case, the simulator should generate the commitment without knowing the plain text in the committing phase. And later in the opening phase, the simulator will receive the plain text and it should be able to equivocate the commitment to the plain text he received. Recall that the simulator's advantages in the GRL model is that the simulator can see the adversary's queries. Our main observation is that the receiver does not need to send anything in such a 2-round protocol. So the corrupted receiver can delay its queries to the random oracle until the committer has sent all his messages. In this case, the simulator cannot know the adversary's queries before computing and sending its messages. In other words, the simulator has no advantages over others at all. However, in order to guarantee the GUC security, the simulator should be able to handle this malicious behavior. So somehow, the simulator generates the commitment without knowing plain text in the committing phase, and later in the opening phase, when the simulator receives the plain text B, he should be able to equivocate the commitment C to the plain text B and just reveal the opening to the receiver. Note that the simulator has no advantages over others at all, so this simulator algorithm can be run by anyone. Therefore, if such a simulator exists, then it will violate the binding property of the underlying GUC secure commitment. So that's a contradiction. It is just an informal description of our proof. The formal proof is a little bit more complex, and if you are really interested, you can see it in our paper. Now we know that 2-round GUC static secure commitment is impossible to achieve in the GRL model. To complete the picture, we give 3 round constructions, which is round optimal. We first come up with a general framework and then show how to instantiate the building blocks on the minimum assumptions. In our framework, which is very similar to the one proposed in MIS 17, needs 2 building blocks. That is straight line extractable non-interactive witness hiding arguments, short for NIWH arguments, and equivocal commitment. In our framework, the receiver will first sample a trapdoor and then use it to generate the commitment key of the equivocal commitment. Then the receiver will use the trapdoor as the witness and use the commitment key as the statement to generate the straight line extractable NIWH proof pi and send the commitment key and the proof pi to the committer. The committer will first check if the proof was correct, and then he will commit to his plain text using the commitment key he received, and we denote by C and D the commitment generated and the corresponding opening. After that, the committer will sample a randomness R and sends M, D, and R to the random oracle and receives H as the output. And finally, the committer will commit to the output H and send C and C prime to the receiver. And later in the opening phase, the committer just reveal M, D, D prime, and R to the receiver. And the receiver will perform some checks to determine whether to accept or not. And it is easy to see why this protocol is GUC secure, and we automate the security proof here. If you are interested, you can see that in our paper. Now we have a general framework. Then how to instantiate the building blocks on the minimal assumption. Here is our technical roadmap. As you can see, both of our building blocks can be constructed from 2 special sound sigma protocols. Now, the only thing left is how to construct efficient 2 special sound sigma protocols on the minimal assumptions. One possible solution is to employ the NPC in the head paradigm, which converts NPC protocols to ZK protocols. However, to the best of our knowledge, there are no NPC in the head-based sigma protocols that achieves two special sound on the minimal assumptions. For example, the famous ZK-BOO and ZK-BOO++ are 3 special sound, and we found that the sigma protocols proposed in KKW18 can never be 2 special sound. Our solution is to base on KKW18 and propose the first 2 special sound NPC in the head based sigma protocols on the minimal assumptions. To sum up, in this work, we proved that 2-round GUC secure commitment is impossible in the GRL model. Furthermore, we constructed the first round optimal GUC static secure commitment on the minimal assumptions in the GRL model. Among all the known work, ours achieves the round optimal and requires the weakest computational assumptions. In this work, we mainly focus on the commitment in the GRL model. How about the situations in the GRPRL model? Actually, we already have some impossibility results. We proved that 2-round GUC static secure commitment is impossible to achieve in the GRPRL model. You can see that in the appendix of our full version paper. However, we found it extremely hard to give constructions on the only minimal assumptions, so we leave it as an open question. Furthermore, in this work, we do not consider the simultaneous rounds. What if we consider the simultaneous rounds? We actually already have some feasibility. We constructed the first 2-round GUC static secure commitment on the CDH assumptions in the GRL model, assuming simultaneous rounds. And it is in submission, but you can find it in the imprint. But we found it extremely hard to give 2-round constructions on the minimal assumptions, whether in GRL model or GRPRL model. So we leave it as another open questions. And that's all. Thanks for your listening.
Audience, any questions? Please.
Audible? Hi, thanks for the talk. So I noticed that you say that you achieve Catriona commitments under minimal assumptions. That's nice, but I'm just curious, is
Yes.
it obvious?
Yes,
These minimal assumptions that you say, is it one-way functions? Okay.
Yes, yes, one-way function. Actually, it is
So-
one-way function.
Okay, so I'm just curious if it's necessarily, or if there's any result that says that you necessarily need one-way functions to get commitments in the random molecule model.
Okay, that's a very good question. Actually, we already considered it before the submissions, but we found it is extremely hard to remove all the assumptions. That is, we found it is extremely hard to give information theoretical commitment in the random oracle model. So we think it is another interesting open questions. Yes, so the answer is I don't know, just whether information theoretical commitment can be constructed in the global random oracle and it achieves GUC security.
I see. Interesting.
Yes, thanks for your question. Oh, okay, you have another question?
Oh no, I mean, it's just kind of following up. Like, did you see if you could maybe use a 3-round commitment scheme to construct a one-way function or something like that?
Sorry, I didn't follow you.
Oh, as in, given a 3-round scheme in the random molecule model, can you construct a one-way function? I was just wondering if you looked at that direction.
No,
Never mind.
so this is to show that the one-way function is minimal. So suppose there exists like your construction, then this implies one-way function. Then if this is true, then one-way function is really required.
Okay.
So the question is, have you explored this direction?
We didn't explore these directions, and thanks for your comment. I think I will, after this meeting, I will think about it, and we didn't think about it before the submissions. And thanks for your questions, and I will really to think about it after the meeting.
Thank you.
Okay. Any further question? I have a quick one. Can you go to your open direction?
Okay.
Yeah. So in your open question 1, you are exploring. So I'm just curious, is there a 3-round secure commitment under some concrete assumptions, not minimal assumptions? So is there such a construction?
Yes, it is proposed in CDGLN 18 that 3-round GUC secure commitment on the CDH assumption is possible in the GRPL model. Yes, it already exists one constructions and it is 3-round. However, they need CDH assumptions. So we think it is interesting if we can explore whether it is possible to give a 3-round constructions on the minimal assumptions in the GRPL model.
Oh, okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
All right. If there is no more question, let's thank the speaker again. So now we are moving to our next talk. Let me take a quick look. So the talk is additive homomorphic functional commitments and application to homomorphic signatures. And Dario will be given the talk, but the recorded talk. So please.
Hello everyone, I'm Dario Fiore from India, and I'd like to present you our research on additive homomorphic functional commitments and applications to homomorphic signatures, which is a joint work with Dario Catalano and Asiacrypt. So this is a work about functional commitments, which is a notion introduced by Libet, Raman, and Jung in 2016 as a generalization of the more popular notions of vector commitments and polynomial commitments. So the idea of functional commitments is that there are two parties, so a sender and a receiver. The sender, we can think of it as a large party that can hold a large vector X, and the receiver instead is of some little resources. And then the sender wants to commit to this large vector and give the commitment to the receiver. But then at later points in time, the sender wants to compute on the committed vector. Like he runs some function f, gives the result to the receiver, but also wants to convince the receiver that if you open the commitment and you run this computation, you obtain this y as f of x. So the main property that makes functional commitments an interesting and non-trivial primitive is succinctness. This says informally that openings and commitments should be short with respect to input sides, but for example, they may grow with the number of outputs and of the function. And for this reason, in 2019, Lai and Malavolta proposed a stronger notion for bounding the sides of openings that says that openings should be short with respect to the input and output sides. So ideally, we would like have both commitments openings of constant sides. So in terms of security, functional commitments are supposed to be evaluation binding, which informally means that computationally speaking, a malicious sender cannot create a commitment and open it to two different outputs for the same function f. In this sense, if we look at the functionality, functional commitments can be seen as a weaker version of commit and prove succinct non-interruptive arguments, in which the strong soundness notion of snarks, in which there is a single proof for a false statement, is replaced by the evaluation binding notion, in which the prover is supposed to give you two proofs for disagreeing statements. So given this observation, potentially we can think that functional commitments could be a replacement of snarks in some applications where evaluation binding is sufficient. There are also additional properties for functional commitments, such as hiding and zero knowledge, that we define and realize in our paper, but I will not focus on this for the rest of this talk. So let me describe what was the state of the art of functional commitments prior to our work. So first of all, I would like to mention that there is a folklore construction of functional commitments that consists into combining snarks for MP and a succinct commitment. And this gives you a functional commitment for any polynomial time computation. The drawback of this construction is that, however, that it does rely on non-falsifiable assumptions due to the use of snarks and known impossibility results. So it is therefore like the interesting problem, the one of realizing functional commitment from falsifiable assumptions. So, and in this space, we actually have a few constructions in the state of the art. First, we have the schemes by Libet et al. And by Lai and Malavolta that can support the execution of linear functionalities. And then more recently, Liebma and Pavlik proposed a scheme in 2020 that can support the evaluation of semi-sparse polynomials. So what we do in this work is to first start from the question in which application we can use functional commitments and with evaluation binding. And our initial motivating result is an observation that if you have a functional commitment and you sign the commitment, this idea yields a very basic form of homomorphic signature. But we push this idea further in our work and show that if the commitment is additive homomorphic and you pair it with a linearly homomorphic signature, then you can build multi-input homomorphic signatures. That is a more powerful notion of homomorphic signature in which the signer can sign the elements of the large data one by one instead of all at once. And this has, for example, more applications such as verifiable computation on data streams. So, this construction yields a new paradigm for constructing homomorphic signatures. And the interesting part of it is that the class of functions supported by the homomorphic signatures is the same as the class of functions as supported by the functional commitments. And finally, we also show that given an additive homomorphic functional commitment, this is also updatable and there's application to verifiable databases. So, okay, if additive homomorphic functional commitments are interesting, then we ask, what do we know about them, and can we construct them? So we observed that in the only commitments in the state of the art that are additive homomorphic are the ones for linear functionalities. So the main results in this work, in our work, are two new constructions of functional commitments that support more than linear functions that are additive homomorphic. So we have a scheme that supports constant degree polynomials and another scheme that supports circuits in the class NC1. And both our schemes have new implications for pairing-based homomorphic signatures. Okay, so that's the roadmap of the talk. I gave you already an overview of our results. Now I want to spend most of the remaining time by give you an idea of how we construct our functional commitment for constant degree polynomials. I will briefly mention our FC for NC1, and then I'll move to conclusions. Okay, so as a warm-up, let's see how we can build an FC for constant degree polynomials by a linearization technique. So assume that we have an homogeneous polynomial of degree d, and then we can see that this can be expressed as the inner product of a vector of coefficients and a vector of monomials that are products of the variables, right? And this product of the variables, which we call the vector x delta, is actually the Kronecker power of x with respect to the tensoring. So what does it mean? It is in the sense that x delta is obtained by tensoring x with itself, and then you take the result, you tensor it with itself, and so on and so forth, and you do it delta times, where delta is the logarithm of the degree d. Then, if you have a functional commitment for linear forms, then we can build a functional commitment for degree d polynomials as follows. So when we have to commit to x, what we actually do is to use the underlying functional commitment to commit to this vector x delta. And then, like when we want to open for a polynomial f, we actually open to the linear form that expresses the evaluation of the polynomial as an inner product. Now, unfortunately, this construction, although it is correct and evaluation binding, it's not homomorphic, even if the underlying functional commitment is homomorphic. And this is the case because what we are committing are actually like products of values in x. So, for example, the value xi may appear in several places of the committed vector and in product with other elements. So to solve this problem, like our construction in a very, very high level sense works as follows. So we start with an additive homomorphic functional commitments for linear maps over a vector space of sides n to the d. When we want to commit to a vector x, we actually do commit to x using the underlying commitment. But then what we do in the opening is to first let the prover create a commitment to this vector x delta. So now we create this at opening time. We create a linear map opening proof with respect to x delta. But then in order to link this x delta with the original commitment to x, we create a dedicated proof to show that x delta actually commits to the Kronecker product of x committed in Cx. Now that's the high-level approach. Concretely, what we do is to open the box of the linear map functional commitment of Lai and Malavolta in order to realize this functionality, in particular, this proof for linking the commitments. Okay, so let me now go more into the details. So our construction relies on bilinear pairings, and here I'm using the bracket notation. So what we do in setup is to create a commitment key that includes the powers of a secret point alpha from 1 up to n to the d. And there are some more elements in the commitment key, but for the sake of this explanation, they are not needed. And now in this slide, I want to give you an explanation how we can open to a function of degree 2 to begin with. Okay, so in order to commit to the vector x, we actually encode x as the coefficients of a polynomial. This polynomial, we call it px0, and this is the sum for j of xj times alpha to the j. And this is in brackets, right? So it's a group element. So we call this group element x0. Now let's say that we want to open to a function f of degree 2. And we follow the blueprint of the previous approach. So the prover commits to the tensoring of x with itself, which is, and again, using this polynomial encoding, and we call the resulting polynomial px superscript 1. And then it creates an opening proof for this with respect to x1, so that the verifier can check. So this is more or less like the Lima-Lavolta proof. Now, however, what the verifier is missing is a link between x1 and x0. So to establish this link, we use this key fact that the polynomial px1, which is encoded in the group element x1, actually factors in two polynomials, and both of these polynomials are linear in x. So one of these polynomials is the one that is already in the commitment, which is px0, and the other one is px0 evaluated on alpha to the n divided by alpha to the n. And if you want to verify this claim, this is in the slide. Now, what is good about the fact that both polynomials are linear in x? This is good because it means that if we include this additional polynomial in the commitment is still homomorphic, because essentially it's a linear combination of x with respect to some different bases. And the fact that it factors in two polynomials, it's good because this can be checked by the verifier using the pairing function. So it can essentially take the elements from the commitment, pair them by themselves, and check that this yields x1. And this essentially convinces him that x1 encodes a tensor product of the vectors encoded in the commitment. Okay, so the generalization to functions of degree d is a bit more complex, but I'll give you a high-level idea. So first of all, we keep in the commitment what I told you before, and now in the opening we give x delta, which is the encoding of the vector x delta, so the delta power of x, and then also we give all the intermediate powers from 1 to delta minus 1. And so these are encoded in xk and xk8. So what is in the verification here essentially it's the generalization of what was happening before. So we check x1 against the elements in the commitment, then we check every xk plus 1 with respect to the previous pair. But here there is a challenge. While in the case of x0, both elements were in the commitment, so in some sense they were sort of trusted. Now the elements xk, one of them is not checked. So while xk is actually let's say could be checked from the previous equation, xk8 is not. So in order to establish the validity of sk, we use again a generalization of the fact that I mentioned before, that this polynomial p at k actually factors in 2 to the k polynomials. Each of these polynomials is linear in x. So the idea to let the verifier check this is to include the polynomials linear in x in the commitment. In total, there are d of them, where d I recall is a constant. And then in order to check this factorization of 2 to the k polynomials, we arrange the polynomials which are encoded in the group elements of the commitment as the leaves of some trees, and observe that each of these polynomial in blue, like p at x1, p at x2, and p at x delta minus 1, is the root of a tree of multiplications that have these leaves. And now, if the prover reveals all the intermediate nodes of these trees, then the verifier can check all these products using a pairing, because it involves only one equation. So, and okay, this is an high-level explanation, and I encourage you to look at the paper for more details. So now, before concluding, I'd like to give you an overview of our functional commitment for NC1. So we obtain this actually by using known transformation in order to express satisfiability of circuits in NC1 via monotone span programs. And our FC actually uses a more general language called semi-quadratic arithmetic programs, which is defined as follows. So it's a language that takes as input two vectors and accepts, and also like it's defined by a matrix F, and it accepts if there exists a vector W such that this system is satisfied. So it's F product the vector, which is entry-wise multiplication of W and Z, is equal to Y. Now, in order to essentially prove with a functional commitment that the function F accepts, the first idea is that we linearize the system by merging F with the vector Z, which is in the commitment. And then after linearization, what we have to do is to prove the satisfiability of the system Fz y. And then we adapt the linear map functional commitment of Lime-Malavolta in order to prove satisfiability of this system, where the crucial difference is in our case is that the input Z is committed, but also the output Y of the system is committed. And along the way, its challenge that we had to solve was to prove the strong evaluation binding of this linear map functional commitment from a falsifiable assumption. And this was new because, like in the previous work, this was only proven in the generic group model, whereas in our case, we did care about getting a proof from a falsifiable assumption. Okay, so this is a summary of our schemes and how do they compare with previous work. I want to especially here highlight what are our new results with respect to homomorphic signatures. So we obtained the first homomorphic signature with compact signature, so which means that the signature have sides constant even in the number of outputs of the function, and this was not achieved by any of the previous schemes in the literature. And then we also obtained the first multi-input homomorphic signature for circuits in NC1 that is based on pairings. And this improves our state of the art because the only previous scheme for such expressive circuits based on pairing was only single input. So to conclude, these are our main results. The first additive homomorphic functional commitments for functions beyond linear and new pairing-based homomorphic signatures. There has been a lot of recent works about new functional commitment for circuits from falsifiable assumptions, including a follow-up by a subset of authors of our paper. These new schemes still leave a few interesting open problems, such as, for example, one is related with the fact that all the new schemes for circuits have opening proofs linear in the depth of the circuit, and it would be very interesting to obtain things that don't have such a growth. And even if we consider, for example, the class of circuits in NC1, it would be interesting to have openings of constant size and compact, because our construction, I didn't mention before, for NC1 does not have compact proofs, only succeed ones. And finally, it would be interesting to find more applications of functional commitment beyond the one that we mentioned. And with this, I'd like to conclude my talk, and I will be happy to take questions.
All right. Let's thank the speaker, and Dario will be online for questions. So if you have questions, please feel free to ask him. So any question? Okay, so if there is no question, we need to move to our third talk.
Hello.
Sorry. Okay. So the third talk is linear map vector commitments and their practical applications. And Anka will be giving the talk.
Okay, so I will talk about linear map vector commitments. And I will briefly introduce the notion of vector commitment. So this was introduced by Dario Fiore and Dario Catalano in this work, and consists in committing to a vector, here a long vector, in a succinct way, in a compact way. So I will represent it by boxes, in such a way that later on we can open some position values from the vector. So for example, here position 6. And prove that indeed this value was contained in the initial vector committed in this box. So the binding property we need is that we cannot open two inconsistent values with respect to the same position. So if P6 was in the vector originally, we cannot convince any verifier that W6 here was in the vector. The vector commitment notion was extended during years, like to open more expressive values like subvectors, multiple values using the same size of the proof. And later on to functional vector commitments, which is exactly the notion that Dario presented before, where we commit to the vector and then we open a function of this. We evaluate a function of this vector and show that the evaluation is indeed correct using this compact proof. Okay, so what we will focus on this work is linear map functions, and these were first introduced by Lai and Malavolta in 2019 and realized under a different assumption and with longer public parameters. So these functions are defined from vectors of length n to vectors of length L and consist in a linear function in every coefficient. Okay, what's the motivation for having such primitives? The main motivation is storage delegation. So let's consider here Aladdin, who is the verifier, who wants to outsource the storage of a long vector to the genie, which is the prover. So this is in the context of untrusted delegation. So Aladdin, before outsourcing this to the untrusted genie, will first compute a short commitment and keep the commitment, then send the vector to the genie. And later on, maybe Aladdin wants to query some function on the vector. So the genie has just to compute the value of the function on the vector and then convince Aladdin by sending a proof that this is the correct result. And the verification is done using the initial commitment, the claim value, and this short proof. Okay, this is the basic property of vector commitment, but there are more properties that we can ask for such primitives, and one obvious and natural one is updates. So what about if Aladdin wants to change one of the values in the vector? This will mean that he has to recompute the whole commitment for the whole vector, but we can do it better if we have updates for such commitments. So just by using this change here, we'll be able to do it more efficiently and compute the new commitment for the new vector. And in the same way, the genie, if he has pre-computed proofs for the function on the old vector, will be able to update these proofs to valid proofs for the new vector in a more efficient way than recomputing from scratch. And there are two different flavors of updates. One is the weak one, where we, in order to update some vector, some commitment or some proof, we need some hint that depends on the value that changed in the vector. And the more strong notion just uses static keys that don't depend on the concrete value that changed, but only on the position that we want to update in the vector. Okay, that's one of the features we would like, but also aggregation is an important property in vector commitments, and this consists in putting together two different proofs. So for example, if Aladdin queries two functions at a time, the genie will be able to compute one single proof for both of them by computing first the proofs and then aggregating them into a short, same size proof that that guarantees the correctness of both results. And this aggregation comes in also different flavors. So we can aggregate proofs for the same commitment for the same vector, or we can aggregate proofs for different commitments. So that's also possible. It's stronger. We can do aggregation once, and then the aggregated proof cannot be used to re-aggregate. So that's one hope. In this paper, we introduce a new notion, which is unbounded aggregation, that allows us to reuse aggregated proofs in order to aggregate them with new proofs. And there is a stronger and different kind of aggregation, which is incremental, that also allows to disaggregate something we already put together into a simple proof. And I will also present the homomorphic property for commitments. So linearly homomorphic commitments allow to compute linear combination of the commitments, and this results into a new commitment that is with respect to the linear combination of the originally committed vector. We have homomorphic properties for the openings as well. And this means that if we have two different function proofs, like proof for two different functions for the same committed vector, we can combine them together linearly with using the linearly homomorphic property in order to obtain a proof for this new function, linear combination of the old two functions of the same vector that is committed here. And we have something that we call homomorphic proofs, which is kind of also recombining homomorphically proofs, but with respect to different commitments. So if we have two proofs for the same function, but applied to two different vectors, we can also do a linear combination of them and obtain something that will be a valid proof for the linear combination of the two vectors that, as I showed before, because the commitments are linearly homomorphic, can be obtained in this commitment by doing the same linear combination. Okay, so I presented a lot of nice properties that we can achieve with vector commitments, but there is a drawback. And the drawback is that the prover has to do a computation linear in the size of the vector. So all the overhead here is in the computation time of the prover. So to solve kind of this inconvenience in practice, we look at how to trade space and time. So how to do to store some information in order to save computation time for the prover. And one simple idea will be to recompute all the proofs for all the openings, all the individual openings here. And in the online phase, the prover just has to access the queried proof and just give the proof without doing any computation. So that's nice. Of course, if we are asked a linear map that accesses position V3, V5, and V7, the online phase will consist into combining this already generated proofs into the resulting proof, using the homomorphic properties into the resulting proof for the function. Okay, so for the space, this is nice. Computation, it's already solved online and offline. Pre-processing is smaller than computing each proof at a time because we have an amortized cost for computing all the proofs together. So Gini is very proud, but there are some problems. So storage may be expensive. This doubles the storage that the Gini has to dedicate for the vector commitments by storing all these proofs. And for the updates, this is a problem because if one value of the vector changes, so the initial commitment will be updated to a new commitment, all these proofs were valid with respect to the initial commit. So these proofs all become invalid. So Gini is not happy. And we have to recompute new proofs for all this vector, for the vector, or update each proof individually. So this is linear in the size of the vector. So what we ask also for vector commitments is this property of maintainability that asks to be able to update all these pre-stored proofs in a way that is more efficient, significantly more efficient than recomputing all proofs or updating it one by one. Okay. So yeah, like what we would like to achieve is to have the best trade-off between space and time for the provers. Ideally, we would like to have sublinear space dedicated to store the proofs, but with fast updates, and to be flexible, so we can allow the prover to choose to use more storage or more computation in order to make the proofs. And the time should be some linear in the size of the vector, so gain in computation execution, and ideally sublinear also in the opening size. So let's see our results that try to solve all these problems and to achieve these properties. The main contribution is first one inner product vector commitment. So this is a particular case of linear map functions. And we give a framework to start from inner product vector commitment and to compute any linear map vector commitment from it. Then we give this construction with unbounded aggregation and updatability with static keys. It's working? No. Okay. No, I think it works. Yeah. And updatability with static keys. And then we give maintainable tree-based constructions that will achieve this update all properties I was explaining before, and flexible trade-offs for the prover in space and time. Okay, so I will start with inner product vector commitment. So what's an inner product? Is this function which is defined by a vector B, which is public, and computes the inner product between a committed vector A of the same length together with this. So we have openings that give the result of this function and allow us to prove that the result is correct. So the idea behind how to realize such primitive is to write the vector in a form of a polynomial and then use nice properties of polynomials in order to open the inner product between a known vector B, a public vector B, and this committed vector in a form of a polynomial. So two ways to write the vector that allows us to obtain these properties are using monomial basis and Lagrangian basis. So in monomial basis, we just write the vector as a polynomial that has coefficients, the exact elements in the vector. This is a polynomial of the degree n-1 for a vector of size n. And in the Lagrangian basis, we have these Lagrangian polynomials here that are computed with respect to a multiplicative group. And we can define a vector by just making a linear combination out of these polynomials, like in an interpolation technique. And we have the nice properties also that when we evaluate the vector at the position I, when we evaluate the polynomial at the position I, we obtain the element in the position I in the vector. I will focus for this talk in presenting our monomial basis construction, which doesn't have this property, but it's easier to understand and it has a very simple idea. So the background needed to understand our construction is bilinear groups, and I will use the additive notation for bilinear groups. So we have here elements from one group G1 in brackets with 1, and in brackets with 2 elements from G2, and the bilinear map, the pairing that allows to compute this AB in the target group, the product of the 2 elements in the target group. And this is the 4 algorithms for a linear map vector commitment, which is some generation algorithm for the setup, then committing, then proving an opening for a function, and then verifying. And I will show you how to realize it for inner product. So as I said, we start from a vector and we write it as a polynomial. And the polynomial is exactly the polynomial with coefficients, that vector. And then we have these public parameters, the commitment key that allows us to commit to the polynomial, which was the vector. And those are consecutive powers of the size, the degree of the polynomial encoded in the first group. So this is powers of tau, some secret value that is never revealed. This is a trusted set. To commit to the vector A, we just use the linear property, linear homomorphism property in the first group here, and we commit by evaluating the polynomial associated with the value, this polynomial, in the secret value tau. We have all the powers in the setup, so in the commitment keys, so we know how to do it. Later on, to open the inner product with a known vector B, what we will do, we will compute this proof that consists in 3 polynomials that have some meaning, of course, and I will explain how we obtain them. So we encode B, the vector B, as the polynomial that has the coefficient, the elements of B, but in the reverse order. So we start with a free term here, Bn, and we increase the monomial power here. Okay, so if we look at B and A polynomials, we can easily remark that if we multiply them as polynomials, okay, we obtain the inner product of A and B. So Bn will be multiplied by An here, and the resulting monomial power here is x. The factor, the common factor is x to n minus 1 for the value of the inner product. Okay, and of course there are a lot other terms in this multiplication of the polynomials, and we can rewrite them using some polynomial h of x times all the terms. These are representing all the terms that have power x to n or more. And this is a remaining polynomial that has a degree smaller than n minus 1. Okay, so I think this is clear, I hope, for everyone. And we want to make sure that this is a polynomial of maximum degree n minus 1. So here we have a lot of powers up to n minus 1 in the, so we need to have a degree check polynomial, which is this R hat that is x times R, and ensures that a prover cannot go farther than n minus 1, n minus 2 for R, because it cannot get farther than n minus 1 for R hat. Okay, so it's a degree check polynomial. So to verify this, I forgot to remember that the proof needs to provide to the verifier this polynomial and this polynomial, H polynomial and R polynomial, and the degree check polynomial. So a verifier having this proof will just have to recompute this decomposition for A times B polynomials and make sure that this relation, polynomial relation, hold here. And this is done because we have the bilinear map, so we can pair together the corresponding elements, the polynomial evaluation in the secret power tau, and make sure that all this equation hold. And of course, we need a verification key with elements in the second group to be able to compute these pairings with elements from the first group and the second group here. Great. So this is the construction. This is also the degree check, same with pairings. And let's see the properties that we realize with this construction. So we have obviously homomorphic commitments because polynomials are linearly homomorphic. So these are just polynomial evaluated in the point in the group. So we can recombine them by just adding commitments, which are group elements. So this is obvious for the commitments. For the openings, it's also easy to just check that the way the openings are computed are still some polynomial relations that are linearly, and the openings and the proofs are still homomorphic. Okay. So then we have updatability for the commitments, and this is specific to our construction, but it's specific to any construction. We show that any homomorphic commitments can be updatable in the same way. So if we modify one value here by delta, then we use the homomorphic property of two commitments, the commitment to delta, to the vector that has only delta in the I position, and we add them together, and this is the new commitment to the new vector. Okay, and same for the proof. We can use some nice properties of the homomorphic proofs and just add this proof of delta and this inner product with the unit vector I and B in order to compute a new proof for the modified vector. And this is the updated key that I computed for exactly this construction, but it's not that important. And for the aggregation, so we have this nice idea to do aggregation in an unbounded way. By here are proofs and claim values for the evaluation of the function. So we can combine them together by generating a randomness using a random oracle that we call in these values, and making a random linear combination out of these proofs. And because this is homomorphic, we can add them together. So this is a random linear combination that results in a new proof for the respective random linear combination of the commitment. So we keep doing this, right? With new proofs, we generate new randomness, we recombine, and we can keep doing this in a sequential way. And in order for the verifier to keep track of what operation and what randomness, how the randomness were generated there, and to check the operations, we need to provide the statement associated with the proof in an ordered manner. So in this kind of tree structure, we need to remember the history of the aggregation, and that's not overloading the information we have to transmit, because we already transmit all the statements. Okay, so this is unbounded aggregation. Yeah. So linear map vector commitments from IP is just using this aggregation in order to, we can see a linear map functions as multiple inner products, right? We can write it as a product of a matrix and a vector, and this matrix is made of a lot of vectors bi. So we compute all the inner product vector commitment proofs and then aggregate them together. And this results in a compact linear map vector, like proof for linear map. And what's a good observation here is that this loses all the homomorphic properties, unfortunately. Okay. So I think I have a table that doesn't charge. Maybe later the table. If I have time. No? Yeah, okay. Yeah, I'm wrapping up with the maintainable tree construction, and I think there is a lag, but I'm trying. So the main idea is like just to put all the commitments in a tree in a way that we halve the vector and we commit to each half in left and right sides, and we continue this process till the leaves. And in order to opening a proof for such a commitment, we first open the chunk here in the leaves and then show that the correct relation between the levels in the tree holds with like some proof of subvector here. And this proof of subvector can be computed in advance. So this makes these nice trade-offs that we can decide what's the depth of the tree and how big the chunks here are. So any prover can choose the right values in order to store this tree and to open in a more efficient way. So the levels here, it's 2 to n levels for 2 to the n times 2 to the k, the length of each chunk here in the leaves. So this takes n for the opening of the levels and 2 to the k for the opening of each base. And some future directions, we would like to have maybe transparent setup vector commitments. This one has trusted setup. We also explore what other larger classes of function we can support with vector commitments. Of course, any construction that will be post-quantum based on lattices or other assumptions would be nice to have. And this tree based vector commitment doesn't have a really efficient aggregation, and that's also an open question. Thank you for your attention. And if you want more details, I'm inviting you to see the paper.
Okay, thank you, Anka, for the talk. So audience, any questions? Please.
Very nice presentation. I have a question. As far as I can see, you treat the pairing like a black box. Do you have any comments about some properties that you may want for that pairing to have, or
Yeah, that's
some special like composite order or something? Is that relevant in this work or not?
I think the best pairing we can use in order to save to have the short proofs, it's type 3 pairings, right? To have all the elements in the first group smaller. Also, if you remark in this specific construction, the verifier needs a big key in the second group, and the verifier has to do some computation in the second group, which can be recomputed in some application if we reuse the same function. But yeah, indeed, like the pairing should have like efficient computation in the first group, and that's the focus. Yeah.
All right. Any further questions? So if we don't have question, then let's move to our last talk, point proofs revisited, and Mahashid will be giving the talk.
Okay, so hello everyone. I'm Mahshid from University of France, and I will talk to you about our work, Point Proofs Revisited, which is a joint work with Benoit Liebert and Anna Presley. So thanks to Anka, I already have a lot of definitions covered, so I'm gonna go pretty fast. So in vector commitments, we have Alice, who has a bunch of values M1 to Mn. And she wants to commit to all of them at once using a single commitment. And later on, at some point, she wants to open the commitment at some positions between 1 to n. So she generates a proof claiming that the underlying committed vector corresponds to some value at this position. And of course, there's a verification algorithm that allows Bob to verify if she's telling the truth. So for the security requirements, we consider two properties, position binding and hiding. Position binding states that, okay, you should open to what you have committed before, so it should be impossible to open to two different values at the same position. And hiding simply states that, okay, if you have multiple proofs for different positions, they should reveal nothing about the unopened positions. Now our work focuses on an instantiation of this primitive, an interesting one, which is introduced by Gorbanov, Raisin, Wee, and Zhang in 2020. And it's a scheme that supports non-interactive aggregations of proofs. Again, we know what it means, but just as a quick recall, it allows different proofs to be aggregated into a single proof, either for the same commitment or for different commitments. It also supports commitment updates. So if you need to update your committed vector at some position at some point, you don't need to reevaluate it from the scratch. You just have to update it according to some procedure. And since it has some very nice features, it's very efficient and it has applications in particular in blockchain smart contracts. And the authors have shown that using point proofs instead of the state-of-the-art vector commitment at that point will reduce the storage and bandwidth up to 60%. The only small downside of this scheme is its security. So it's proved to be perfectly hiding and computationally binding. So we're so happy with the perfectly hiding because, well, it's the best you can hope for. But yeah, there's a small issue with the proof of the computational binding. It's proved under some assumption called NWBDHE, and it's in the algebraic group model plus random oracle model. So we'll see what's wrong with it. But for now, our contribution is removing this algebraic group model from the proof and without changing the scheme at all. And we do it also from a weaker assumption called NDHE, which I will describe later. So as I said, point proofs support non-interactive aggregations of proofs. and well, it was covered before, but yeah, it can be categorized into two parts: same commitment aggregations or cross commitment aggregations. Here in our talk, we focus on the same commitment aggregations binding proof, but well, we did the cross commitment aggregation part in our paper too. So for the same commitment aggregation, what we want is we have multiple proofs for different positions for the same commitment, and we want to aggregate them all together to get a single proof for the subvector. Yeah, in other words, yeah, Alice again has a bunch of values, and at the later point, she chooses some subset of indices like S from 1 to n, and she wants to open this commitment to some values at all of these positions all at once. So what she does is generating proofs for each of these positions and then aggregates them all together using a single proof and send it to Bob. And then, yeah, the verification algorithm is extended accordingly. So here, the security requirement is also extended to, cover this subvector notion. So we want it to be impossible to be able to open some committed vector to two different subvectors with an intersection on which they have different values. Okay, yeah, just to see why it's a contradiction, I will first introduce this notation of m bracket s. So for a vector of values m1 to mn, and a subset of indices from 1 to n like s, I will denote by m bracket s the subvector obtained by choosing the values of the vector on these positions. So let's assume that we have an adversary that has committed to a vector like m, and at a later point, it generates two proofs, pi and pi prime, with respect to two subvectors, m of s and m prime of s prime, where these two sets have an intersection like I star, on which the two open values don't agree. So what it means is basically proof pi opens the committed vector to some values on these positions, and then pi prime opens it on the values in the subset S prime to some values on these positions. But there is some index I star in which the two proofs open the same, open the vector to two different values. So it's a contradiction, and we don't want this to happen. Now, as I said, yeah, in our work, we introduce a new security proof for this same commitment aggregations for this great scheme point proofs in the random oracle model without relying on the algebraic group model and from a weaker assumption. In our full version, in the full version of our paper, which will be on the ePrint soon, we also show how applying the techniques introduced in the point proofs will result in having perfectly hiding polynomial commitment with constant size batch openings. Now let's see what's wrong with this algebraic group model. So I will compare it to the well-known generic group model, which is an idealized security model, where we only consider generic adversaries. So this kind of adversaries only have access to a random representation of the group. So they have access to a meaningless representation. Their computation doesn't rely on the representation of the group. And they compute group operations via oracle queries. So in some sense, we can say that these kind of adversaries have black box access to a group. In the algebraic group model, however, we only consider algebraic adversaries. So these kind of adversaries don't have restriction regarding their access to the representation of the group, so they can have the actual representation. But the limitation is that if they output something, they need to tell you how they have computed it from the known group elements, okay? So they basically give you a cheat sheet saying that, yeah, this is the way I have what I have now. So these are all basically unrealistic situations, and we want to avoid them as much as possible. And that's what we do. Now I will explain how our proof works for the same commitment aggregation in the random oracle model without algebraic group model. But first, let's recall the construction of point proofs. So in the construction for the public parameters, we have a cyclic group G generated by this small g here of prime order P, and we have a vector of values g to the alpha up to g to the alpha n. The element g to the alpha n plus 1 is missing. And then we continue from g to the alpha n plus 2 up to g to the alpha 1. Okay. And in order to commit to a vector of values like m, what we do is picking a random element of the group order like gamma and multiplying g to the gamma to some product of g to the alpha j times mj for all the indices j from 1 to n. But if we zoom in on what's happening in the exponent of g here, is basically we consider a polynomial of alpha of degree 2n, and then we set the coefficients of alpha 0, alpha 1 up to alpha n to be respectively gamma and 1 to m. Okay, so it's pretty easy. And then when we want to open this commitment on some position I, what we do is taking this, blue subvector, then we shift it all the way to the right until the coefficient mi becomes the coefficient of alpha n plus 1, and then we remove it completely. Okay, and then the verification is done again very simply. So we use a pairing to check some equation. So we consider a second group, a target group, and we check some equation in the target group. And what it does is very easy. So the left-hand side takes this blue subvector in the exponent of the commitment. It shifts it all the way to the right again until the committed value mi becomes the coefficient of alpha n plus 1. And the right-hand side first puts this proof pi I, which misses the coefficient of alpha n plus 1 in the target group, and then adds the value that it wants the commitment to be open to this position. Okay. And yeah, the verification is done by just checking if the two polynomials are basically equal or not, which is reduced, to checking if these two coefficients are equal. So yeah, you can see that if you open to what you have committed before at this position, then it's correct. Now, so at the end, the scheme looks something like this. We also add the second group G hat, the pairing that we have, and also a bunch of values G hat to the alpha, G hat to the alpha to the n, where this small G hat is generator of the second group. And the hardness assumption based on which we're gonna prove the security, the binding property, is NDH assumption. So it states that given all of these elements that we have here, it's still hard to compute this missing element due to the alpha n plus 1. Okay. So why is this binding? So here I'm only considering the proof for a single position. So if we go back to the verification equation, the right-hand side, what it does is, taking the proof, taking the polynomial in the exponent of the proof, and then adding it with at this coefficient alpha n plus 1 with what you wanna open to. So since our hardness assumption states that g to the alpha n plus 1 remains unknown, then any proof, even an adversarially generated one, should have 0 as the coefficient of alpha n plus 1. Okay, so in the end, if you want the verification to pass, you have to set this coefficient to be the exact value that you have committed to before. Okay, so it is indeed binding. And in some sense, we can consider mapping between any polynomial and proof pair to what makes this proof to pass in the verification algorithm, which is the missing coefficient, okay, and which is the value that you have committed before at this position that the proof corresponds to. Okay, now let's see how the aggregation works. So in order to aggregate a bunch of proofs for different positions in some subset S, what you do is multiplying all of them together, but using some randomness in the exponent, which is obtained from querying a random market. And with giving the position I, the commitment, and the set and the subvector that you want to open the commitment to as input. And yeah, again, if we zoom in on the exponent of G here, what we have is a bunch of polynomials where in all of them, the exponent of alpha n plus 1 is missing. We multiply each of them by this random value that is obtained from the random oracle, and we sum them up together. Okay. And here, the missing part of this aggregated proof, again, is the coefficient of alpha n plus 1 in this summation, which is this sum of mi times hi for all of these indices that is in this set S. So here, the mapping that we can consider for a commitment and the proof to what makes the proof to pass is this missing summation again. Okay. So this is exactly what is done in the verification. It's basically multiplying a bunch of verification equations together. And yeah, again, seeing why it's correct is pretty easy. So why is it batch binding? Yeah, let's recall the batch binding definition again. So let's assume that we have an adversary that outputs a single commitment and two subsets and two subvectors. And two valid proofs, pi0 and pi1. So they are both valid, they both pass the verification algorithm. And there's some problematic index I star in the intersection of S0 and S1, such that the two open subvectors correspond to different value on this index. Okay, so this translates to the mappings that I pointed to before. Two mappings from the same commitment C and pi0, pi1 to two missing sums that make these proofs to pass. And if we look at, both of these subsets have this index I star in themselves. So if we look at this term that depends only on the index I star, then the idea becomes a bit clear. So the idea is basically get rid of all the other elements in each of these summations to find a conflicting proof for the single position I star. And this is done by controlling the randomness in the random oracle model. And we'll see how. So as promised, I'm gonna now show you the actual proof of the batch binding and using some lemma called local forking lemma. So the way it works is, we consider an adversary that outputs these two conflicting batches, S0 and S1. And we know that the adversary is querying the random oracle to get some, randomness that it wants for the aggregation of proofs. And if we zoom in on the query that includes this problematic index I star and the first set S0, and we run the adversary a second time while changing, only changing the answer of the random oracle query on this specific query, then what happens is, again, this will, it will output two conflicting matches. But the thing is that due to local forking lemma, the components of this specific query will stay the same in the output of the adversary. So we have, again, the exact same set S0, which we considered before in the output. So basically, we have two summations with respect to this set, with respect to two different proofs. And again, we separate this problematic index I star from the two summations. And then we can remove every other elements from the summation because everything stays the same. We didn't change any query answer on anything else. And then it can be translated to, the verification equations. And if we divide them together with, verification equations for the subset S0, if we divide them together, then we get a single verification equation for this special index I star. And we do the exact same thing for the second set S1. So we get another verification equation for this index I star based on, obtained by dividing the two verification equations, this time for the second set. So in the end, we have two verification equations for this index, special index I star, which contradicts the position binding, for the single position, which was not possible assuming the NDHG assumption. So in the end, we have the batch binding. To conclude my talk, we provide a new security proof for the point proofs in the random oracle model without relying on the algebraic proof model and without changing the scheme. Our proof is done for both the same commitment aggregations and cross commitment aggregations. In the case of same commitment aggregations, we also can use the generalized forking lemma, which works a bit better in the term of security loss. And in the case of cross commitment aggregations, we only could do it using local forking lemma. And we also, as I said, propose the first perfectly hiding polynomial commitment with optimal batch openings, which include one group element, inspired by techniques in point proofs. And this is based on inner product functional commitment of Liver, Ramanna, and Jung under the same NDHA assumption. Thank you very much for listening.
All right, we have time for a couple of questions. So audience, do you have questions? Okay, so is there, if we don't have questions, let's thank the speaker one more time. And I think lunch is outside, so yeah. Okay, so let's conclude this session. Thank you for attending.